that anybody will have tried slicks in a GT car, or an NGT car as this is, because it was just so wet earlier. But David, still very clear reflection of the lights off the tarmac, and that tells you at least something about the state of the road, even if Mancini hadn't spun there.
While it's not perfectly dry all the way around, there are certainly dry pieces on it. We've seen that from the race previous. But these guys are going to be very, very careful. They're going out here in completely unknown conditions. Since they've arrived here this weekend, it's been purely rain, rain, rain all the time. And as we said earlier, it was so heavy, the rain earlier on, that these cars, the NGT cars, were quickest cars out there, beating all the GT cars as well. And they've got to adjust now to something they've not done at all this weekend, and try and get their slick tyres to work. And we can see at the moment, watching this car go around here, they're not working very well. This car's trying very hard. It keeps getting a bit of acceleration. The back comes out, that bit of wheel spin there. And this is him coming into the last chicane now before the start and finish. And he's got his wiper on at the moment. I'm not quite sure why.
He's probably caught it with his hand when he was dialing in the opposite lock a couple of times. Now coming across the line to start his flying lap, and anybody watching from the pits who has got access to a TV screen, and that's in most of the garages up and down the pit lane, will be hurriedly changing, David, I would suggest, off slicks and onto, at very least, intermediates to try and get some grip, because it is perilously treacherous.
I'm sure there will be. Those teams are well organised. They'll have had someone down at the end of the pit lane when this car was leaving, just to see what tyres were actually on there. If it's gone out on slicks, then they'll notice that. They'll see how slippy it is out there. And if they go the intermediate route, then that is a lightly cut slick racing tyre, usually of a very soft nature, to give it as much grip as possible. So maybe they decide that they will go with the intermediate tyre to try and get that immediate grip after one lap, rather than have to rely on slicks. You can see there, as it comes out to the Adelaide hairpin, there is water still running across the circuit, and a little bit of spray coming up there. So even that little bit of water will cool the tyres down. And he's certainly being very cautious now going around this circuit. You can see the car moving constantly in the corner and not getting a great deal of speed.
Well, there are some big gravel traps around, but there are a couple of corner exits, and out of the Adelaide hairpin is one where he's coming up to now, where if you get it wrong on the exit, there's very little in terms of safety margin before you hit the wall. And here as well, as you come out of that right-hander, there is a wall fairly close. So the drivers really do have to be a little bit cautious. All right, it's only practice day and the race isn't until tomorrow, but still, you really don't want to go writing off the car just for, you know, the difference between, let's say, potentially here 12th on the grid, because he's the slowest of the 12 in the previous session, to, I don't know, 11th or 10th or 9th or 8th even. It's just not worth the effort.
I think the main thing is to try and keep into the car in one piece and not actually damage it, because that'll be of greater interest than actually losing 1 or 2 places on this grid. You're guaranteed the top 12 slot, so keep the car in one place.
Now, those of you with bigger screens than us in the commentary booth will have noticed that it has in fact started raining again. Now, our commentary booth windows are actually further out of the building at the top than they are at the bottom. In other words, they tilt inwards, so it's not showing on the window of our commentary booth, but it's being picked up now on the cameras. And Mancini, well, this is the mugs game really, first man out, and he is the one who's proving that A, it's wet, and B, it's very slippery indeed. So now the second of our cars to go is Christian Pescatori in the JMB GS of Ferrari. This is the 360 Modena, one of a pair of cars, and this is the one that was second by about 1/10 of a second to the NGT winner at Brno, and it was black then. Now it has got its familiar tricolore colours, green, white and red, of course, the Italian colours. But again, now you can really see it is starting to rain heavily, so instantly revise now what we said about potentially having an NGT car on pole, because David, if the Ferrari and the Porsche are struggling this badly, I wouldn't like to try and get the, whatever it is, 600 odd horsepower ballista down on the road.
Well, what's happening now, of course, is it was nearly dry when they set off on this, and it started to rain, so it would only get worse. So as we get to the end with the GT cars running second behind these NGT cars now, then it will only get worse. So the possibility of one of these NGT cars being on pole position is getting greater by the minute.
And the possibility perhaps of somebody going for a full wet and just chancing it. After all, they have effectively a limitless supply of wets. They're not controlled, so you can go and chunk the living daylights out of one on one fast lap, and actually it won't really cost you anything.
They can try and do that, but I'm sure they've just got to be out there. Team managers will be standing there on the pit wall looking just to see how wet it's going to be. talking to the drivers and convincing them that really they should go out on either slick or intermediate when the driver knows he would like to be nice and safe and put a wet on and not worry about the grid position. After all, this race is the best part of 3 hours long, so there's plenty of time to sort it out. As long as you're in the top 12 when you start, I don't see a big problem.
Well, Pescatori being very judicious here with his use of the throttle. Now, he was on his warm-up lap, of course, when Mancini was actually doing his flying lap, and he was leaving the pits as Mancini was doing his exploratory spin on his first lap out. So he won't really have seen very much, but with the radio in the car, I'm sure the team will have said to him, careful, Mancini's just spun on the very first corner, be very, very cautious. And I don't think too many drivers will need second bidding, especially when, I don't know, again, he may well have gone out on slicks. We're obviously up in the commentary booth and not able to see. But 2 minutes 2:4:03, I mean, that is a very, very slow lap indeed, even compared to some of the drier running. The fastest lap in the Formula Renault race we will show you in a short while, where it was pretty much dry. Drivers on slicks doing 1 minute 43s, and you wouldn't normally expect a Formula Renault car to be quicker than these guys.
No, these guys really have got it very difficult at the moment. They're out there just slipping, sliding around as we watch the screen now. You can see that car, it's moving, always lost it. There it goes. It will eventually always managed to catch it, got one way and then the other. He was very lucky that it didn't spin right around on the grass. The grass here is absolutely soaking wet, having had 3 days of torrential rain. So the minute you get to the grass part of it, you're going to keep on accelerating until you eventually hit the tyres. But you can see around here there's massive gravel traps all the way around, and they're at the right part on the exit to the corner, so if you do make a mistake, you'll end up in there. Somebody will come and drag you out very quickly to a place of safety, and it's up to you what you want to do after that.
Now, I'm a little perplexed because, as we said, the 6 fastest NGT cars and the 6 fastest GT cars take part in Super Bowl. They're supposed to go in reverse order so that the fastest in each class will be the last of each class to go. We've just seen Fabio Mancini and Christian Pescatori. We should actually be seeing Jürgen von Gartzen in the number 51 Porsche. Clearly, we're not seeing the number 51 Porsche. This is the man who was 3rd quickest, not 4th quickest. This is Luca Riccitelli in the 77 Red Bull car. So why the Labra competition car of Jürgen von Gartzen that he'll share with Bruno Eichmann is not out on track, I can only surmise in that they decided not to have their shot at Superpole and potentially risk damaging the car, because after all, they can start in the top 12 whether they finish a lap or not. Now, he's not shown on the timing screens as even having left the pits. Mind you, the timing screens don't show Riccitelli as having recorded any kind of a time for that previous lap, whereas he should possibly have done. However, we'll see how he fares. Already, like his teammate Mancini in the other Red Bull car, with 1 spin on the warm-up lap, just to underline how difficult this is going to be. And if you don't think the cars are going very quickly, then that's not an effect of the cameras. The cars really aren't going very quickly, David, at all, and you can understand why when you see that shot.
Yeah, you can see as he came into the Adelaide hairpin, the really tight hairpin here, that the front was locked up and he had a lot of angle on that steering wheel trying to turn it in, and it wasn't turning into where he wanted. It was going straight on and missing the apex. Again, where you can see them running over the curbs. These curbs are painted, and anything that's painted with rain on it becomes very slippy. It's like ice, basically. So they're going to find it very difficult to try and get a good line around here. And a bit more oversteer there as you come out of the corner. While they've got a lot less power than the GT cars, they've got more than sufficient to be able to turn the car around and face it the wrong way. They're finding it very difficult out there. They have to hang on, and it's not a case of going out there and doing the absolute best lap, but it's going out there and trying not to fall off, bury it in a gravel trap, or even damage it.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that the Formula Renault race has been on and in very much drying conditions, and there were a number of incidents, predictably enough, in a category jam full of hot-blooded young men, and it's just entirely possible that somebody may have left a bit of oil down in a few places as well, from potentially from a damaged car. There was a lot of oil down in practice. The drivers were complaining that not only was it wet and slippery, it was oily and slippery on the practice day yesterday. And, well, Luca Riccitelli goes fastest of all now, a slightly more adventurous lap than Pescatori's. Luca Riccitelli fastest of all, 1 minute 58. Christian Pescatori second quickest, 2:02. And Fabio Mancini, 2:02.7. Coming across the line to start his lap then. Well, it's the other Labre competition Porsche. We didn't see Jürgen von Gartzen in the car that looks identical to this, except for the fact that it's got 51 on the bonnet. This is the 50 car driven by Sébastien Dumez, and the French ex-Formula 3 driver will be sharing this car with Patrice Gousselard and with Jean-Luc Charot, the man whose company sponsors these two NGT cars and the GT class Viper. And the Charot organisation builds custom-built truck trailers, so they've got the swankiest trucks in the paddock, and a very strong team. 3 cars here and 4 cars in the French GT Championship races that were on yesterday, so it's everywhere you turn you're falling over Charot car of one type or another. Well, still don't know why Jürgen von Gartzen didn't take the 51 car out, but Sébastien Dumez is doing his level best here, throwing the car around. And again, I think these guys coming out a little later will, I think just feeling the rain coming down, never mind what they saw in the monitors, will have convinced them that slick tyres was a pretty hopeless gamble, and they will definitely be on some kind of intermediate tyre. Well, coming round behind him, and very close behind him at the moment actually, you can see in the background a red Porsche, and that is the guy who was fastest in practice, the Czech Thomas Enger. And Enger is sharing his car with Justin Wilson, his Nordic Formula 3000 teammate, both of them sponsored by Coca-Cola, who also sponsor the car in the GT Championship, or a pair of cars in fact, in the NGT class. Enger fared very well indeed in Superpole and in the race in Brno, the Czech Republic, his home track. Sébastien Dumez goes fastest of all, so maybe the little bit of drizzle has stopped now. Dumez is fastest and about to come across the line. Let's hope the director comes back in time. He does, is Enger. And David, I think it's a very good thing to see drivers like Enger and Wilson here. All right, it's not a clash with anything else, but you don't often see top-line single-seater drivers going out and doing anything else on their days off.
Not anymore. It used to be many years ago in the 60s such things would happen, but nowadays they concentrate very much on their career to try and move forward towards Formula 1. But it's great, as we say, to have these top-line Formula 3000 drivers who are first and second in the Formula 3000 Championship here this weekend in the same car. And this car we are expecting to do extremely well. 2 very, very good drivers. Quickest in qualifying, which is why it's what it is now. We're watching it at this moment in time. The times we've seen have started to come down a little bit. I mean, Luca Riccitelli was down at 1:58 as opposed to the 2:02s before, and Sébastien Dumez was down at 1:54.9. So the times do seem as though they're coming down, and maybe it's not quite as wet. We see the wipers not on Thomas Enger's car. So maybe that rain has stopped again.
I think it has. I think the drizzle has stopped because he's noticeably less sideways, isn't he?
He is. He's very clean with the car, very precise with the car. He's not throwing it around, he's not slipping and sliding it around. And the quickest way forward is to actually drive it forward, not to slide it sideways through the corners. So all these other team managers in the GT cars will be out there panicking, no doubt, wondering exactly what they're going to do. Are they going to put on intermediates? Are they going to put on slicks? And I'm sure they just don't know themselves at this moment in time.
Well, he's on his way back towards the line. Let's hope that the Charot car gets well and truly out of the way, because Enger is trying to set the time for, well, potentially for pole position, depending on how the weather goes, certainly for pole position in his class, and he doesn't want to be held up. The Charot car is out of the way as he gets to the final corner. Out he comes to cross in front of us and stop the clocks at 1:52.187, and that is the fastest of the 5 who have gone in this Superpole run. Apologies, as I say, no idea at all why Jürgen von Gartzen's Labre competition car didn't take to the track, but I may just send a boy to find out. Tom, if our colleague from British Eurosport here doing a bit of research, if he can run downstairs and find out, we might be able to tell you before we get to the end of that. But at the moment, Thomas Enger is fastest of all from Sébastien Dumez and Luca Riccitelli, Christian Pescatori and Fabio Mancini. So we're about to see the fastest 6 GT cars in action. And in the very wet session yesterday, David Leslie, the best of the GT cars among the NGT cars. The NGT cars ended up being the top 3 on the timesheets, but the best of the GT cars, I thought a little bit surprisingly, were the 3 Belmondo Vipers, despite the fact that they're not on the normally more fancy Michelin tyres, but on Dunlops.
They had a good day yesterday, basically, compared to most of the other teams. They certainly do work well on the wet, whether it's the Dunlop tyres being that little bit better for them compared to their competitors or not. But they were out there, and this car ended up 6th quickest today in qualifying, which is why we're watching it here at the moment. Unfortunately, the 2 teammates didn't do quite so well. One put it in the gravel trap very early on, and the other teammate somewhat in the middle of the session, and this one actually ended up in the gravel at the end of the session. So all 3 of these lovely blue and yellow cars ended up having to be pushed in with lots of gravel falling out from underneath them this morning. But here they are out, they're still sliding around. They've got that extra power, you can see it coming out there as it starts to accelerate, just so much more power than the NGT cars, and making life a little bit more difficult for Vincent Voss, who's driving this particular car.
But again, as you say, David, he is sliding around a little more, but with 600 horsepower, he's not. I mean, it wasn't really that out of control. The tail, right from the beginning of the laps, he came out the final hairpin, stepping out, but not that far. I mean, nice and controllable, having almost as much trouble actually getting the nose around the corners, and with that big heavy lump of steel out front, that's hardly a surprise in these front engine cars.
It is a very heavy car indeed, and you can see that going around the corners. You've got great difficulty getting it stopped and turned into the corner. Never mind when you want to accelerate and the back of the car suddenly lights up. You can see them coming around there with that bit of oversteer all the time. The weight will hold them back, and the bigger tyres in the really wet weather conditions are not good for them. You need something a little bit narrower to cut through the really heavy rain that we had yesterday. But he's doing very well here at the moment.
Now he's almost at the situation actually where he's getting into a nice little 4-wheel drift through the corners in classic pre-aerodynamics motoring style. So nice to watch, and actually probably quite fun to play around as well, if only something serious wasn't up for grabs. Vincent Voss then goes quickest, so there will be no NGT car on pole, because he's gone exactly to the 1,000th, 3 seconds quicker than Thomas Enger. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's ride on board the rocket ship that is Emanuele Naspetti's Raffinelli-run Ferrari 550 Maranello. And David, he really lit up the afterburners out of the final turn as well.
He's going for it. He's not taking the easy route. He's decided he wants his pole position, and he's trying very hard out there. And somewhere on this lap, I'm pretty sure he's going to catch that Belmondo car that just finished his timed lap before he gets back to the pit lane.
Fabulous sounds from these cars. Of course, the little lever there, the sequential gearbox, down to 3rd, down to 2nd, down, oh, in fact he was in 6th there, so all the way down to 2nd gear. And the V12 engine sounds absolutely wonderful. And we're looking forward as we go in 2 weeks' time to Silverstone for the British race. Make sure you're there, by the way. It's going to be brilliant sunshine. Nobody is expecting it, but it will be. The ProDrive Ferrari coming out as well to join the pair of Raffinelli cars and the father and son Nico and Franco Vith-run Ferrari. Well, as you say, the Belmondo car is in the way, and he better darn well get out of the way. This is something we haven't had the problem of in Superpole before. On board, you see, well, finally, the number 5 Ferrari not held up. Down he comes through the Nürburgring chicane. This a potential overtaking point, although the onboard shot doesn't really make it look much like one. You can get very brave and catch someone by surprise there if you like. Out of the Adelaide hairpin, and now the run back down towards the start-finish line. And I have to say, Naspetti was very good value indeed at Monza when he was pushing so hard, first time out in Superpole in this Ferrari, that he spun it in the Parabolica. And out of the final corner he comes, actually keeping the wheel spin under control. 146, 185, 3 seconds and 2 1,000ths quicker than the last man. So in fact 6 seconds quicker than the fastest NGT car of Thomas Enger. It is definitely getting much grippier, and that's got to be good news for the 2 listers. We've got Julian Bailey next, and then Jamie Campbell-Walter will follow him.
As they're coming out with this car, a lot of power, and they're going to struggle with the back end of that car. They don't like the damp and wet conditions with this car as much as some of the other cars do, the Vipers, etc. And maybe not quite as flamboyant as the Ferrari drivers are getting the car around the circuit, but nevertheless very, very quick indeed. These are the current reigning champions, and they did win the first race at Monza. So there's nothing slow whatsoever about them, but they do much like the nice dry weather.
Well, they do. They're much more stiffly sprung, much more of a square-built race car than the Vipers, particularly, and the Ferraris as well. And so they do tend to aquaplane a lot better. The big flat floor on the Lister, especially compared to the little cars, the NGT cars, Julian Bailey was saying, makes it more like a speedboat than anything else in the water. They don't like standing water. They don't like slippery, greasy conditions. And they really don't like the deluge, particularly that we had yesterday afternoon. And we've had word up from the pits that Jürgen von Gartzen didn't go out because they didn't have time to change from slicks onto a more suitable tyre for the wet weather. Well, okay, unfortunately for them. Julian Bailey here, though, for the first time in a Super Pole, because David, at Monza, he was supposed to go out in the Super Pole run, and then, of course, they found a crack in the bell housing of the car when they were warming it up on the jacks in the garage, ready to go for Super Pole, and decided that if he selected gear and dumped the clutch into dry, then he would drop the gearbox and all its innards on the road, and so that was probably not a good way to go.
No, he's not done a great deal of racing laps so far this year. Had a few problems with his car, but he's out there and going quite well at this moment in time.
Yes.
Will it make it or not?
Well, it's going to be very close indeed. 1:45.740, so goes a fraction quicker than Emanuele Naspetti, 0.445 of a second. So Bailey now fastest, and his co-champion of last year, Jamie Campbell-Walter, will now have to shoot against that. Jamie Campbell-Walter, the reigning FIA GT champion, joint champion with Julian Bailey, racing both of them still for the champion team. This year, separated though by Lister, Julian in the number 2 car with Nicolaus Springer, and Jamie Campbell-Walter in the number 1 car, sharing again this weekend with Tom Coronel, the man with whom he shared at Monza, their opening race being a successful one for the Lister team. Tom Coronel was on Dutch touring car duty, a contract that predates his Lister deal. Last time out for Bruno, so Richard Dean was drafted in, who raced for Lister last year and the previous year in the British GT Championship. And Jamie Campbell-Walter, David Leslie shooting at Julian Bailey's time, and on their previous experience together, you'd have to say there's very little in terms of pace between either of them, so this could go either way really, and I'm sure, having seen the mark, that Julian will be Jamie now, I'm getting myself confused, will be pushing even harder.
Yeah, Jamie doesn't like to be beaten by Julian at all, and Julian, having been left out of the team during the winter, was brought in at the very end, just before the start of the season. Wanted to try and prove a point that he was quicker, and Julian's been trying very hard to do that since the season started. So Jimmy, I'm sure, will try not to let that happen, and will be out there and pushing as hard as he can to get to that position and be in front of Julian wherever he can.
Again, nice little slides controlled by Jamie Campbell-Walter, and very little in terms of a track being left by the tyres, which is normally a site that the track is very much drying up, because they almost always leave a little trail behind them when they push the water away on a damp track. Still pretty slick though. Yeah, look how long it is before he gets on the power. He was all over the curbs on the water there and just didn't dare touch the gas, and as a result he is beaten by Julian Bailey, so he's third quickest at the moment, because that was in fact slower than the Ferrari of Emanuele Naspetti, and that was all really, David, I think lost in the final few yards there where he got wide out onto the curbs and just didn't dare touch the gas. He nearly was in the pit wall as it was.
You just cannot touch the gas when you get onto those curbs. As I said earlier, these painted curbs are like glass once they've had rain on them, so he's got to keep off them, and unfortunately he didn't manage to do that, and he lost a lot of time coming out of that corner. Very, very tight second gear corner onto the start and finish straight. You've got to get it right, or as we've seen, time just disappears from you.
This is Mike Hazemans, the second fastest man in qualifying in the Carsport Holland Viper. These heavily modified pair of cars, the Carsport Holland cars, had a dreadful time at Monza, blowing 3 engines, but showed at Brno that they have got the pace and the ability to last the race at the front. Didn't win in the end, but still pushing very hard indeed, and obviously very keen to get on with it. He was only half a lap behind as Jamie Campbell-Walter came across the line there, and as you saw, 1:43 7:64, the fastest lap so far. So Hazeman's on pole, just one car left to go. It's Hazeman's from Bailey, then Naspetti, then Campbell-Walter, then Vincent Voss, then the NGT cars. Now this is the car that won last time out. Christophe Bouchou once more at the wheel of the Labre competition car. And he was the man who was fastest in Superpole at both the last times of asking. So Christophe Bouchou and the Labre team feeling very, very confident, even in yesterday's wet weather. In fact, as far as they're concerned, vis-a-vis the listers, the more it rains, the more they'll like it. Not great against the Porsches, but certainly it tends to give them a little bit of an edge over the lister team. And with their Michelin tyres as well, then certainly they don't see wet weather as much of a threat. Well, Bouchou, of course, a former single-seater driver, raced up to Formula 3000 level and was picked up by the factory Mercedes team to race in their last years of GT racing, part of their FIA GT and Le Mans squad. And certainly his sports car abilities don't need too much underlining by his performances in this car, and he has done absolutely enough here just in this season alone to justify his position as one of the most dangerous men in the field. Certainly the Lister team regard this car, I think, as a very big and very consistent threat, and once the Car Sport Holland cars get fully sorted, they will also regard them as even more of a threat. Of course, it was at this track last year that Mike Hasemans and then his partner Tom Coronel tried to take the championship all the way to the final corner with Julian Bailey and Jamie Campbell-Walter. They lost out, as they do surely here on the fastest lap. No, 1:43.570 by just under 0.2 of a second, despite that big slide arriving on the paint there at the end. Bouchou hanging the tail out to go quicker than Hasemans. So in actual fact, the front row as it would have been if Superpole hadn't existed. Bouchou from Hasemans. The two Vipers will start first and second. Julian Bailey will be third on the grid. Emanuele Naspetti's Ferrari in fourth place. In fifth place will be Jamie Campbell-Walter in the Lister, and sixth place Vincent Voss in the better, or in fact the best of the Belmondo trio of Vipers. Then in seventh place Thomas Enger and Justin Wilson in their Porsche. In eighth place Sebastian Dumes in the Labre competition Porsche. Ninth is Riccatelli's Red Bull car. 10th place Christian Pescatori's Ferrari. 11th place Mancini's Red Bull Porsche, and 12th on the grid will be von Gartsen's Labre competition Porsche. So that is how the top dozen will start, and there are the times you see, just under 0.2 of a second faster Bouchou. Car looks stronger, and apart from that slide across the curbs at the end there, he might have been well, better part of half a second up, David.
He was pushing very hard. We've seen when he came out of the hairpin across that water that runs across the circuit, the car really did step out there. He was hard on the throttle. He was trying as hard as he could to get that pole position. He'd managed it in the morning in qualifying, and he wanted here in Superpole as well. He wasn't going to give it up.
So that is how they will start in Superpole. The FIA GT remainder of the field go out for a final 15 minutes in the dry to decide how qualifying will end up. So all those positions may yet change. Back towards the pits comes Christophe Bouchou, and does my memory serve me right, David? Is that 3 poles out of 3 Superpole shootouts for Christophe Bouchou in the Labre competition car?
I think it is, actually. He's really been on the pace when it comes down to it, when you down to this one lap shootout in order to get that pole position.
So great weather for ducks, and apparently for starlings as well. It's obviously not the hunting season here yet in France. Otherwise that little feathered friend would be very much more cautious about where he's going eating. We are at Magny-Cours, about 2 hours south of Paris, in the middle of France, just on the River Loire, in fact. And, well, the river's threatening to come up and meet the rain on the way down. It's so wet round here as Superpole comes to an end. Christophe Bouchou in the Labre competition Viper once more at the front of the dozen-strong pack of Superpole shootout men. And He was lucky, I think, that the conditions didn't set in to rain, because as it started drizzling for the first 2 or 3 cars, it looked as though we were going to have an NGT car on pole. Such was not the case. In fact, all the GT half dozen were faster than this man, Thomas Enger, in the Coca-Cola car, the best of the NGT runners. Still very much fancy Enger and Wilson to be, if not necessarily winners of the NGT class, then certainly on the podium. And, well, who knows, maybe a podium position for the Raffinelli Ferrari as well. They were 5th and 6th at Brno. I think those cars are getting stronger and stronger as the drivers actually get some miles in them. Well, we'll try and get down to the pits. Christophe Bouchou's car has returned now to the pit lane. And our man Simon Walster should be down there with the microphone. Catch up with him as soon as we can. A very Larry last moment for Christophe Bouchou, but still, super pole is his.
Christophe, many congratulations, pole position at Magny-Cours. How much of an advantage was it being at home?
Well, for sure, we are all French in lap competition, and we want to be the best on our home race, for sure. Bon, second time in qualifying in Super Pole. I'm happy first line for the third races, so it's really good. I missed the opportunity to catch pole in the last corner when I missed my traction control, but I'm happy. Now tomorrow it's 3 hours.
Will you be hoping for a wet race? Will you be hoping for a wet race? Do you want it to rain?
Excuse me? No, excuse me.
Okay, thank you, Christophe.
Well, as you can hear, the rest of the GT and NGT field out there doing their final qualifying. And Bouchou thought he'd lost his chance at pole there, sliding over the curbs out of the final corner. He'll now go back to the team to find out that, in fact, he is on pole for the 3rd time in 3 races. Join us for